So let's hone in on this headline story now. The United Nations General Assembly kicked off in New York yesterday with most world leaders delivering their addresses virtually, of course, due to the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the world body is celebrating 75 years since it was formed to promote peace, justice, equality and dignity across the globe. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in the past 75 years, a third world war had been avoided, poverty and hunger had been reduced and diseases eradicated. But there are, of course, new challenges in this year of its 75th anniversary. Let's unpack those challenges now with Dr. David Monyae, who is the director of the Center for Africa-China at the University of Johannesburg. He joins us via our video link this morning. Dr. Monyae, thanks again for your time on the AM report. What a whole new world it is in this 75th year of the United Nations. We're talking about a coronavirus pandemic, climate change. There's also this renewed tension between the US and China. How do we then talk about a united world, in the words of our president, Cyril Ramaphosa?
I think it's a question of the African continent pushing further for unity, for the strengthening of multilateralism, as well as resourcing of this institution. But I think at the core of these arguments that should be made is the need for transformation. The entire system needs to be reformed. Firstly, for us as a continent with 1.2 billion people to be represented in key institutions and on the table as well. Of United Nations Security Council, where the highest decision-making decisions are made, and ensure that the United Nations continues to push for development, which is at the center of all other problems we have.
Yeah, I mean, as the UN talks about its wins over the past 75 years, avoiding a third world war, reducing poverty and hunger, if we reflect on the work it's done as a global body, is the UN on track despite what it says are its successes?
It has done extremely well, and if we judge it against our own continent, it has done extremely well in terms of peacekeeping, dealing with conflict issues, refugee issues, and a number of other health, particularly health. The World Health Organization has done extremely well. But at the same time, this is the body that also has failed dismally. From the 60s, the Congo War, Patrice Lumumba was killed with a very weak United Nations and failed to defend him. And we've seen that Rwanda genocide happen under its watch with the late Kofi Annan, son of the continent, and quite a number of other issues in climate change that you have mentioned. And that speaks to the nature and character of the body. It remains weak, and powerful countries, particularly those in P5, permanent members of United Nations Security Council, seem not to allow the body to be much more stronger than their own groupings, particularly Western countries. And therefore, I think going forward, there is a need to include developing countries, including our own continent.
And again, the issue of multilateralism comes to the fore. I mean, there were so many calls from our own president as well in that virtual address yesterday, calls for reform, calls for cooperation as a global community now, particularly amid the COVID-19 pandemic. It's something that unites us all in different ways. But then there are these rising rivalries. I mean, they existed before. They're even more tense now, particularly, and you've mentioned it before, between the US and of course, China.
We have a pending crisis that United Nations development plans, development goals, might not be met, particularly on our continent, if we divert resources to deal with the pandemic. At times like this, also coupled with the crisis and tension between the most powerful countries, economy number one, United States, and followed by China, economy number 2. And we, as a continent, trade with these powerful countries. We need assistance. We need to trade with it, particularly on key issues as we enter the fourth industrial revolution. Issues of technology, as it stands, the two countries seem to be going in different direction, with the potential of having a divided world, as the Secretary General mentioned, where you have a US-led world internet and trading system, and on the other hand, having a parallel China-led. And in that situation, this is not, and it won't help the continent to develop. We have our own Agenda 2063. And President Ramaphosa mentioned the need to deal with issues of debt and debt management, that during the pandemic, as we confront it, perhaps there's a need to ease the payment so that we concentrate on dealing with the crisis of health. At the same time, encouraging African countries to develop and invest more in health, invest more in technology, and all other key issues to be able to effectively deal with the crisis through intelligence.
Yeah, Dr. Monyae, I want to ask you about whether the UN is being as assertive as it needs to be now. You talk about a simmering crisis, particularly between, again, the US and China. I mean, even on its own website to mark its 75th anniversary, the UN said that this event, these commemorations were taking place, quote, at a time of great disruption for the world. Should the UN's wording around this pending crisis, notwithstanding the issue of the pandemic that we're all facing, but this pending crisis between the US and China, should it not be asserting itself more strongly?
There's quite weakness in terms of the nature and character of the United Nations. It's a combination of all countries of the world, and at the top of UN in terms of power decision making, we have United Nations Security Council. Nothing moves within United Nations without decision taken by the United Nations Security Council. And within that body, Africa is not represented, and these two countries have veto power, and therefore we've seen disagreements, whether over Syria, Iraq, and all other crises in the world. If one member state, a permanent member, disagree with that decision, all they do is veto the issue and rendering the entire institution useless. And at this stage, also the body relies on resources coming from these powerful countries, particularly the most developed. United States has pulled out of WHO, weakening that body in terms of resources. And therefore, I think we need more members to contribute even more. And therefore, the entire system needs to be reformed to ensure that you have changes in terms of how it operates.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks very much for your time this morning. Dr. David Monyae is Director of the Center for Africa-China at the University of Johannesburg, as we continue to reflect on 75 years of the United Nations since it was formed to, among other things, promote peace, justice and equality.